My name is Alice Green. I'm 32 years old, and the day I discovered my car was being sold without my permission while I was halfway across the world, I realized something terrifying. I had spent years teaching the people closest to me that my boundaries didn't matter. I thought being helpful meant being family, that silence meant strength, that sacrifice meant love. I was wrong. What I'm about to share with you isn't just about a car or money or even betrayal. It's about the moment I stopped being convenient and started being powerful. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, you're probably wondering how someone could just sell your car like that, right? How does a family you've supported, helped, and trusted turn around and treat you like you're nothing more than a resource to be used up? Well, let me take you back to the beginning, to the years I spent building this perfect image of the devoted daughter-in-law, the reliable sister-in-law, the woman who always said yes. I didn't know I was writing my own script for disaster. If this story is already hitting close to home, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because what you're about to hear will change the way you think about loyalty forever. Here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or warnings. It creeps in through 1,000 tiny moments where you convinced yourself that being understanding was the same as being respected. I gave rides, paid bills, fixed problems, stayed quiet during arguments I should have walked away from, and every single time I did, I trained them. I trained my in-laws to see me not as Alice, not as a person with her own life and needs, but as the solution to their problems. And when you become the solution, you stop being human. You become a tool. And tools get used. I was in London when my phone buzzed at 3 a.m. with a message that made my stomach drop. It wasn't a, "Hope you're having a great trip" or "Miss you" text. It was a screenshot of a car listing. My car. My silver Honda CR-V that I'd worked overtime to buy. The one I'd driven across state lines for their emergencies. The one I'd lent them countless times because family helps family. Except this time, they weren't borrowing it. They were selling it. And I wasn't asked. I was informed. The message came from my sister-in-law, Jessica, and it was written with the kind of casual confidence that comes from someone who genuinely doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. "Hey, Alice. Just a heads up. We listed your car for sale since you're not using it right now, and we really need the money. Don't worry. We'll get you a good price." Like I should thank her. Like my absence meant my belongings were community property. My hands were shaking so badly I had to read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. Papers signed, buyer contacted, photos posted online. They'd already moved forward without me. I sat there in that cold hotel room, my mind racing through every time I'd said yes when I should have said no. Every boundary I'd let slide because I wanted to keep the peace. That car wasn't just metal and wheels. It represented my independence, my hard work, my ability to leave when I needed to. And they knew that. They knew exactly what it meant, and they took it anyway. That's when I realized the ugly truth. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as an ATM with legs. And the worst part? I'd trained them to think that way. But here's the thing. They forgot one crucial detail while they were busy selling my car. Little did they know, this was just the beginning. It didn't start with the car, though. It started years before, with smaller things that felt harmless at the time. A ride to the airport here, a loan there, helping them move furniture on a Saturday I'd planned to rest. My mother-in-law, Patricia, would call with that specific tone in her voice, the one that wasn't quite asking, but wasn't quite demanding either. "Alice, honey, I hate to bother you, but..." And I'd drop everything, every single time. Because that's what good people do, right? They show up. They help. They don't keep score. Except somewhere along the way, helping stopped being a choice and became an expectation. When I couldn't make it to their last-minute dinner because I had a work presentation, Patricia sighed like I'd personally betrayed her. When I suggested they call a professional plumber instead of me fixing their sink again, Jessica rolled her eyes and said, "Come on, Alice. It'll take you 10 minutes. 10 minutes that turned into 3 hours and a ruined pair of jeans." But I smiled. I always smiled, because I thought that's what love looked like. Being useful, being available, being silent when my own needs conflicted with theirs. The truth is, I was so busy trying to prove I belonged in this family that I forgot I didn't need to audition for a role I'd already been cast in. I married their son, David, and that should have been enough. But David was always traveling for work, always absent during these moments, and I became the bridge between him and them. I became the one who absorbed their emergencies, their complaints, their financial gaps. And with every favor I granted, I handed over a little piece of my power. I didn't know it then, but I was teaching them a dangerous lesson. Alice doesn't push back. Alice doesn't say no. Alice is safe to take from, and people will always take what you allow them to take. Looking back now, I can see the pattern so clearly it almost hurts. It started with my time, picking up groceries for Patricia when she didn't feel like going out, which happened at least twice a week. Then it escalated to money, covering Jessica's rent 1 month when her boyfriend left her, which turned into 3 months because she was still getting back on her feet. I told myself these were investments in family harmony, that one day they'd remember how much I'd done and appreciate it. That day never came. Instead, the asks got bigger and the gratitude got smaller. Before I continue, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button, because what I'm about to tell you about how I reclaimed my power is something every woman who's ever felt used needs to hear. The breaking point wasn't even the car at first. It was the company. See, while I was busy being their personal ATM and chauffeur, I was also quietly building my career in procurement and supply chain management. I'd worked my way up to a senior position where I managed vendor relationships and contracts for major accounts. One of those accounts? A manufacturing company that Patricia and her brother Tom depended on for their small business. They had no idea I controlled that relationship. They just knew their orders kept coming through smoothly. Here's what they didn't understand about power. It's not always loud. It's not always visible. Sometimes power is knowing exactly where the weak points are in someone else's foundation, while they assume you're just being nice. Every time I approved their purchase orders, every time I expedited their shipments, every time I made sure they got priority treatment with our suppliers, I wasn't just helping. I was building leverage. I was creating a dependency they couldn't see because they were too busy seeing me as convenient, not strategic. And when you underestimate someone for long enough, you forget they might be 10 steps ahead of you. They were about to learn that lesson the hard way. When I finally processed what they'd done, sitting in that London hotel room with my heart pounding and my hands still shaking, I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't about needing money for an emergency. This wasn't even about the car itself. This was about power. Specifically, about reminding me that I didn't have any. They could take what was mine, make decisions about my property, and expect me to just accept it because that's what I'd always done. The car was a test. It was their way of saying, "We own you, Alice. Your things are our things. Your boundaries are suggestions, not rules." That Honda CR-V represented something they couldn't stand: my independence. It was the vehicle I'd use to drive away when their demands became too much. The escape route when Sunday dinners turned into 3-hour guilt sessions about why I wasn't visiting more. It was mine in a way nothing else in my marriage felt like mine anymore. David's house had his parents' furniture. Our weekends revolved around their schedules. Even our finances were partially tangled with their emergencies. But that car? I'd saved for it myself, chosen it myself, paid every monthly installment myself. It was proof that I existed outside of their ecosystem, and that's exactly why they had to take it. Because as long as I had something that was completely mine, they couldn't fully control me. The sale wasn't about desperation, it was about domination. It was about teaching me that even when I was thousands of miles away, living my own life, making my own choices, they could still reach into my world and rearrange it. They wanted me to come home furious, to argue, to beg them to stop the sale. They wanted the drama, the emotion, the proof that they still had the power to make me react. But here's what they didn't count on. I'd already stopped playing their game. I just hadn't told them yet. The details of how they orchestrated it made everything worse. After Jessica's initial message, I started digging. I called my neighbor, Marcus, who confirmed he'd seen Tom, Patricia's brother, taking photos of my car in the driveway 3 days earlier. Tom had waved at him like it was completely normal, like he had every right to be there. Then I checked my email and found a forwarded message from the DMV that David had apparently signed off on, giving temporary authorization for the title transfer. My own husband. He'd enabled this. When I called David, his voice had that defensive edge he always got when he knew he was wrong but didn't want to admit it. Alice, come on. You're not even using the car right now. My mom really needed the money for some medical bills. And I thought you'd understand. You always understand. That phrase, you always understand, hit me like a slap. He said it like it was a compliment, like my willingness to be steamrolled was some kind of virtue, like I should be proud that I'd become so predictable, so manageable, so utterly absent of self-respect that they didn't even need to ask anymore. They just took. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just said, I'll handle it, and hung up. David called back twice, but I didn't answer. Jessica sent 3 more messages justifying the sale, each one more defensive than the last. Patricia left a voicemail about how family supports each other in hard times, and how disappointed she was that I was making this difficult. Making this difficult. As if I was the problem. As if setting my car up for sale without my knowledge or consent was just a minor miscommunication. That's when the rage settled into something colder, sharper, more useful. I wasn't going to fight them on their terms anymore. I was going to change the entire game board. Every fiber of my being wanted to get on the next flight home and explode. I wanted to walk into Patricia's house and demand answers, to make them feel even a fraction of the betrayal burning through my chest. I drafted a dozen furious text messages, each one more scathing than the last. I imagined the confrontation, me standing in their living room, finally saying everything I'd swallowed for years, watching their faces as they realized they'd pushed too far. It would have felt so good in the moment, but it also would have accomplished absolutely nothing. Here's what I'd learned from years of watching them operate. Confrontation was their home turf. They thrived on emotional chaos. Patricia could cry on command and turn herself into the victim within minutes. Jessica would gaslight me into questioning my own reality, saying I was overreacting or remembering things wrong. Tom would get loud and aggressive, making me the hysterical woman who couldn't handle family business. And David? David would play peacemaker, asking me to just let it go for the sake of keeping everyone happy. They'd done this dance 100 times before with other people, and they'd perfected it. If you're watching this and thinking about someone in your life who always turns your valid anger into your character flaw, hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because I'm about to show you a different way. So I made a choice that went against every screaming instinct in my body. I said nothing. No angry calls. No heated texts. No dramatic confrontations. I let them think they'd won. I let Jessica believe I was just going to accept it. I let Patricia think her guilt trip voicemail had worked. I let David think his, "You always understand" line had smoothed everything over like it always did. Silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Because while they were celebrating their little victory, patting themselves on the back for successfully managing Alice again, I was pulling up financial records, contract details, and business dependencies they'd forgotten I had access to. They wanted a reaction. I gave them a plan instead. While they were busy selling my car and treating me like a doormat with a bank account, they'd completely forgotten about the professional Alice, the one who held their business lifeline in her hands. Patricia and Tom ran a small manufacturing operation that produced custom metal components for industrial clients. It wasn't huge, but it was their primary income, their retirement plan, their entire financial identity, and it depended entirely on one critical supplier relationship that I managed through my company. They had no idea. To them, I was just Alice who works in some boring office job. They'd never bothered to ask for details. The supplier, Meridian Industrial, provided the raw materials they needed at rates that made their profit margins possible. Without Meridian's competitive pricing and reliable delivery schedules, their business would collapse within months. They'd have to find alternative suppliers at nearly double the cost, which would either bankrupt them or force them to raise their prices so high they'd lose all their clients. I knew this because I'd spent 2 years carefully negotiating and maintaining that relationship. I'd gotten them priority status. I'd expedited emergency orders when they were behind schedule. I'd even absorbed some shipping costs on my company's side to help them out during rough patches. And here's the part that made my blood run cold with a different kind of clarity. They'd never once thanked me for it. Not once. Because they didn't know. They thought their business was thriving because Tom was a great negotiator and Patricia was so good with clients. They thought their success was self-made, earned, independent. They had no clue that the woman they were dismissing, using, and betraying was the invisible foundation holding their entire operation together. It was almost poetic, really. While they were taking my car, they were standing on ground I controlled. And they wouldn't know it until the ground disappeared. I stayed in London for 2 more days. And during those 48 hours, I didn't argue with anyone. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain why what they did was wrong. They already knew. They just didn't care. Instead, I spent those hours doing something far more productive. I studied every contract, every agreement, every piece of leverage I had access to. I reviewed Meridian Industrial's terms with Patricia and Tom's company. I checked renewal dates. I examined alternative supplier options they might pivot to if things went south. And then I made a series of quiet, calculated phone calls that would change everything. Power isn't volume, it's positioning. It's knowing exactly where you stand on the board while everyone else is still playing checkers. I reached out to my contacts at Meridian and casually mentioned I'd be transitioning some accounts due to restructuring priorities. Nothing dramatic, nothing personal, just standard corporate language that wouldn't raise any red flags yet. I also started conversations with their competitors, getting quotes and terms that would have made Patricia and Tom's current arrangement look like a gift from heaven. I wasn't burning bridges. I was quietly buying them, one by one, while they slept soundly, thinking they'd successfully put me in my place. The most beautiful part was how invisible it all was. There were no angry emails they could screenshot and share in the family group chat. No shouting matches they could recount to David to make me look unstable. No evidence of me punishing them that they could use to paint me as the villain. I was just doing my job, making professional decisions, reallocating resources like any competent manager would. And if those decisions happened to affect their business, well, that was just an unfortunate consequence of their earlier choices. They taught me that my boundaries didn't matter. I was about to teach them that consequences do. On my last day in London, sitting in a cafe near my hotel with rain streaking down the windows, I made the decision that would flip our entire dynamic. I wasn't going to stop them from selling my car. Let them have their little victory, their few $1,000s, their moment of feeling like they'd successfully managed me again. Because while they were focused on that car, I was going to do something far more significant. I was going to acquire the company they desperately needed. Not Meridian Industrial itself, that was too big, but a smaller competing supplier that had been struggling and was quietly looking for a buyer. The company was called Apex Materials, and it was perfect. They had the capacity, the quality, and the desperate need for capital that made them willing to negotiate fast. I'd done business with them before and knew their owner, Richard, was ready to retire, but hadn't found the right buyer. I called him from that cafe, rain drumming against the window, and made an offer that we both knew was fair. We structured it so I'd take majority ownership immediately with him staying on as a consultant for 6 months. The whole conversation took 40 minutes. By the time I finished my coffee, I'd changed the trajectory of multiple lives, and none of them knew it yet. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you're subscribed because this revenge gets so much sweeter, and drop a like if you think they deserved what was coming. I used the same money they thought they'd get from selling my car, money I'd been saving for a down payment on my own place, away from David's family's constant intrusion. Instead of a house, I bought leverage. I bought power. I bought the ability to never be dismissed again. The paperwork moved fast. Richard was motivated. I was determined. And by the time my plane landed back in the States 3 days later, Apex Materials had a new owner, and Patricia and Tom's business had a new reality they hadn't seen coming. I didn't announce what I'd done. I didn't send a triumphant text or make a dramatic reveal. I just came home, unpacked my suitcase, and waited. The first crack in their reality came exactly 8 days later when Patricia called me. Not David, me, with a voice I'd never heard her use before. It was polite, careful, almost respectful. "Alice, honey, I was wondering if you had a moment to talk about something work-related. Tom and I have been having some issues with our supplier, and we heard through the grapevine that you might know someone at Apex Materials." The shift in her tone was so jarring I almost laughed. Turns out, Meridian Industrial had sent them a routine email about contract renewals and updated terms that weren't quite as favorable as before. Nothing dramatic, just standard market adjustments that I'd quietly arranged during my transition planning. Patricia and Tom panicked and started reaching out to alternative suppliers, only to discover that Apex Materials was now their best option for pricing and delivery schedules. And when they asked around about how to get preferential treatment with Apex, every contact pointed them back to the same person, me, the woman whose car they'd sold, the daughter-in-law they'd treated like a convenient resource. Suddenly, they needed meetings. They needed my advice. They needed my connections. The next few weeks were a masterclass in watching people rewrite their own history. Jessica, who'd sent me that casual, just a heads-up text about selling my car, now messaged me asking if we could grab coffee and catch up, because she felt like we hadn't connected in a while. Tom, who'd taken photos of my car without permission, suddenly remembered my birthday and sent flowers. Patricia started inviting me to lunch, just the two of us, something she'd never done in 7 years of me being married to her son. They didn't apologize for the car. They didn't acknowledge what they'd done. They just recalibrated, sensing that the power structure had shifted even if they didn't fully understand how or why. And I let them wonder. Of course, the narrative they told themselves and others was that I'd changed, that success had gone to my head, that I was being cold and distant for no reason. I overheard Patricia on the phone with her sister, saying something about how Alice has gotten so corporate and transactional lately, it's like she doesn't care about family anymore. Jessica posted vague social media statuses about people who forget where they came from and how success changes some people. The irony was almost beautiful. They'd spent years training me to be a doormat, and now that I'd stopped lying down, I was somehow the villain. David was caught in the middle, confused by the sudden shift in how his family treated me. He noticed his mother's careful politeness, his uncle's nervous deference, his sister's forced friendliness. "What happened while you were in London?" he asked one night, genuinely baffled. "They're acting weird around you." I looked at him, this man who'd signed papers to sell my car without my knowledge, who'd told me I always understand like it was a compliment instead of an indictment, and I realized he still didn't get it. He didn't understand that his family's respect had a price tag, and I'd finally stopped paying it with my dignity. I didn't explain myself because I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not anymore. They called me cold. I accepted it. Manipulative? Sure. If that's what strategic thinking looks like to people who've never had to plan beyond their next favor to ask. Ungrateful? Absolutely. I was done being grateful for the privilege of being used. Here's what I learned. The moment you stop performing goodness for people who've weaponized your kindness, they will make you the villain in their story. And that's okay, because villains aren't controllable. Villains aren't convenient. Villains have boundaries, and boundaries are the one thing people like that can't stand. The strangest part of this entire experience wasn't the revenge or the power shift. It was the silence that came with it. For years, I'd filled every awkward moment with explanations, apologies, justifications for why I couldn't do more, give more, be more available. I'd over-explained my boundaries like I needed permission to have them. I'd apologized for being tired, for having plans, for existing in ways that weren't immediately useful to them. But after London, after buying Apex Materials, after watching them scramble to regain footing they didn't know they'd lost, I just stopped talking. And in that silence, I found something I didn't know I'd been missing. Peace. I stopped answering Jessica's texts within minutes. Sometimes I didn't answer at all. When Patricia called with her newly respectful tone asking for advice that was really just asking me to fix another problem, I'd say, "I'll think about it and get back to you." And then I wouldn't. When Tom tried to corner me at a family dinner about expediting an Apex Materials order, I smiled politely and said, "Let's keep family time about family, not business," and walked away. The power wasn't in what I said. It was in what I no longer felt obligated to say. I didn't owe them my time, my energy, my constant availability. I never had. I'd just been taught that love looked like sacrifice without reciprocity. Here's what silence taught me. Self-worth isn't something you earn by proving your value to people who are determined not to see it. It's something you claim by refusing to audition for belonging anymore. Every time I said no without guilt, every time I let their discomfort sit without rushing to fix it, every time I prioritized my own peace over their convenience, I was rebuilding a foundation they'd spent years eroding. And the wild part? The less I performed for them, the more they respected me. Not because they suddenly understood what they'd done wrong, they didn't, but because power recognizes power, even when it doesn't want to admit it. 6 months after I returned from London, I made another decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I filed for divorce from David. Not because of the car, though that was certainly a catalyst. Not even because of his family, though their treatment of me had shown me what my future would look like if I stayed. I filed because I'd finally understood something fundamental. I'd spent 7 years trying to be enough for people who would never see me as more than useful. And I was tired of being useful instead of valued. David didn't understand. He genuinely didn't. To him, things had been getting better. His family was nicer to me. We'd stopped fighting about his mother's constant demands. I seemed more independent and confident. He saw all the surface changes but missed the deeper truth. I'd stopped needing him or his family's approval, which meant I'd stopped needing the marriage. When he asked why, when he begged for another chance, when he promised things would be different, I didn't give him a list of grievances or an itemized breakdown of 7 years of boundary violations. I just said, I deserve to be chosen, not tolerated, and you've never chosen me over their comfort. The hardest part wasn't leaving. It was accepting that I didn't need to make them understand why I was leaving. Patricia sent long emails about how I was throwing away a good marriage over pride. Jessica called me selfish for abandoning family when things got tough. Tom spread rumors that my little business venture had gone to my head. And you know what? I let them. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct their narrative. I didn't try to make them see my side. Because the beautiful, liberating truth was this. Their opinion of me was no longer the foundation of my self-worth. I'd built a new foundation, and it didn't require their validation to stand. Looking back now, 2 years later, I can see the whole journey with clarity I didn't have when I was living through it. The car was never the real issue. It was just the final, undeniable proof of a pattern I'd been ignoring for years. Every boundary I'd let slide, every favor I'd granted at my own expense, every time I'd swallowed my frustration to keep the peace, I was teaching people that I didn't value myself. And when you don't value yourself, no one else will do it for you. They'll just take what you offer and ask for more, because that's what you've trained them to expect. Here's what I wish I could tell the Alice from 7 years ago, the one who was so desperate to be accepted into David's family that she performed endless acts of service hoping they'd eventually love her. You already had the power. You always did. It wasn't hidden in some business deal or dramatic revenge plot. It was in your ability to say no, to walk away, to stop participating in relationships that required you to shrink. Most women don't lack strength or capability or intelligence. We just delay using our power because we've been taught that boundaries make us difficult, that self-advocacy makes us selfish, that choosing ourselves makes us cold. We wait for permission to take up space, and that permission never comes because the people benefiting from our smallness will never voluntarily grant it. The moment you stop begging to belong, the moment you stop performing goodness for an audience that will never applaud, the moment you stop sacrificing yourself on the altar of other people's convenience, that's when life shifts. Not because you become mean or heartless or vindictive, but because you finally understand that love without respect isn't love at all. It's exploitation wearing a family reunion name tag. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending that giving until you're empty is somehow noble. The real power was always in knowing when to stop giving and start protecting what's yours. Your time, your energy, your peace, your future. They didn't take that power from you. You just forgot you had it. And now you remember. So here we are, at the end of my story about a car that was never really about a car. If this resonated with you, if you've ever felt used by people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever been called selfish for finally choosing yourself, if you've ever wondered whether you're the villain for refusing to keep playing the victim, then you're not alone. There are thousands of us out here, rebuilding ourselves from the ground up, learning that self-respect isn't something you earn from others. It's something you give yourself, and then you defend like your life depends on it. Because in many ways, it does. I want to hear from you. After hearing my story, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted them immediately? Or would you have played the long game like I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one, and your perspective matters. Maybe you're going through something similar right now, or maybe you've already walked this path and came out stronger on the other side. Share your story. Let's build a community of people who refuse to shrink anymore. And if you want more stories like this, raw, real, unfiltered accounts of betrayal, revenge, and finding yourself again after people tried to erase you, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Next video, I'm going to share something even more intense. The story of a woman who discovered her best friend had been sabotaging her career for years, and the calculated way she turned the tables without her friend ever seeing it coming. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until then, remember this. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep anyone else warm. Not family, not friends, not anyone. I'll see you in the next video.